welcome everybody to the Brothers, Sisters, Strangers podcast. This is our second video podcast that we're doing together with Fern and I. And my name is Ali John Chaudhary. I'm a psychotherapist, and I think the subject of sibling estrangement is something that we think is really underrepresented and not often as talked about as what it should be. And this is going to be the occasion to be able to continue to expand further on this topic that's grossly unacknowledged in family context and in society in general. So my name again is Ali John Chaudhary, psychotherapist, and I look forward to, of course, having you listen in on to this important topic.
My name is Fern Chapman, and I'm the author of several books. I have a book coming out called Brothers, Sisters, Strangers in February of 2021. It is part memoir and part research about this very important topic. And I'm happy to be with you.
Wonderful. I'm glad you're here, Fern. This is wonderful for us to be able to do this again. And I want to come back to our video because our video has been really been getting a good reception because we've had several views, close to 100 views already, and it just keeps on growing. And people seem to be coming back to it. I've been getting some feedback from people, and I've had some personal messages sent to me about thanking me and thanking us to be able to talk about this because this is such an important topic. And I think that there's certainly room for us to continue to do this because people have that need. And today, I think that we can talk about various subjects, of course, and maybe touch upon the coronavirus, I think is especially important. But I think also that it's important that we look upon some of the themes that some of the people that were listening in mentioned in some of the comments to the video that was said. I think there was something along the lines of mourning the living, right?
Yeah, I believe I said that last week. I found that sibling estrangement was this ongoing experience. It's not like a death in that a death is final. In the case of sibling estrangement, there's this chronic longing. And I call it mourning the living because you're stuck in a state of grief.
Yeah.
And there's no negotiation with death, but there's always the hope with sibling estrangement that maybe you'll be able to reestablish a relationship with your estranged loved one. And so that's why I say it's mourning the living. And actually, this can go on for decades. And that was my experience.
And I think that's a very, very important theme that you're bringing up in that way, because for me, I used to host grief counseling groups and bereavement counseling, and oftentimes it was one thing to know that you lose somebody due to death, but as you say, when the other person is simply not in your life anymore, it really plays on the mind because you start to wonder, well, what's going on with that person? What's been happening with them? And in some ways, you try to envision some of that, and there's the pain that comes up with not being able to have a full relationship because of the friction and the discomfort that comes along with sibling estrangement. So definitely, it's a type of grief I think that needs to be acknowledged, and definitely I think this is something that is good for different forums to be talking about also, just so that way there's more of a visibility towards that.
I think it doesn't matter whether you're the shunner or the one who is shunned. There's still a loss and there's still mourning. There's the wish that somehow we could hit the reset button and try again. And for those who are actually doing the shunning, I'm sure they make these choices to relieve themselves of the burden of the relationship. But in my case, my brother was shunning and I was shunned, and I never really understood why. And that creates this whole arena for rumination.
Exactly. And that's the thing with the living too. I think it's the idea that you end up filling up those spaces in your mind. You end up wondering, what is it that's happened, if there's been a shunning of some sort? What is it that you may have said or done? So we talked about last time the idea of plucking our feathers, so to speak. And I think we do that because we start to wonder in some ways why we're being treated differently, if there's something wrong with us. And this is a dangerous course to go into, because you can come up with any which reason to do that. And if that happens and you start to ask yourself, well, why am I being shunned? It could come up with painful conclusions that might not be even based on fact. So,
and we've discussed this a little bit, but the sibling estrangement actually permeates all aspects of an individual's life experiences. So it affects self-esteem. It affects your ability to trust somebody else. It affects your ability to sustain relationships. And those things are pretty devastating to if you're carrying that sort of thing around.
Yeah, I would say so too. And I think that if you have to be careful about owning something that's not yours. And I think that that's really key here. And I think that if we're conscious of the idea that this is something that belongs to the other person, I think that's really, really important to realize. I can talk about an epiphany that I had in Montreal, as a matter of fact, if you want. I think this is something personal. I was taking some training in hypnosis, and this is an ongoing process that I love as a tool that I use with my clients. And I had the experience under the influence of being hypnotized, was that all of a sudden I understood myself to be this warm and caring person, and to completely disassociate myself from the image or the weight of what my sibling seems to perceive me to be in that way. So for me, that was like really a huge awakening experience, because all of a sudden I felt that I saw myself for truly who I was, with the light inside of myself, and that I had what it took, especially to be able to carry on into the future for myself.
You really have to separate yourself from that piece. So if hypnosis helps, my gosh, that's great.
It's a great tool to be able to do that, and it did that for me, and I was ready for that because I was carrying that, and all of a sudden it's like I had a weight lifted off of me. And of course each person's experience is different, but the idea that vision is not yours and you're taking on somebody else's vision of you, I think is very, very important to realize that you are not that. And it's important that people realize that. I just want to say that.
In my case, I was estranged from my only brother for decades. And I'm afraid all I can say is I mourned the living. I never was able to put that kind of perspective on it. And only when he and I started to talk and reconcile did I understand that this was not about me. It was about him.
Exactly. And that's the thing, is that when the conditions are right and both of you feel safe and you're able to open up, it's when whatever emerges out of that all of a sudden you realize that there's something going on, there's a dynamic or a chemistry that builds, and it goes beyond you as an individual. It's really something that starts to happen within somebody, or because of the back and forth dynamic. So it's really important to see that as such and not to own that. So absolutely, and I'm happy to hear that you guys were able to do that. So,
well, I think too, and I think it's important to recognize that there's a lot of fantasy that plays into mourning the living.
Yeah.
So I held tightly to this idea of what it would actually feel like to have my brother back in my life. And I'm not sure it was particularly accurate, but that was a hope I had and a wish and a fantasy. Now that he is back in my life, there are certainly ways in which it's been fulfilled, but there are a lot of ways in which it isn't. It just isn't. The mind plays games with you.
Yeah, and I would agree. And I think that there's that romanticized version or that fantasy that we have in that way, what we hope will eventually arise out of that once and if it happens, and what it could be potentially. But there's the reality of what it is also. And I think that that's important to be able to distinguish that too, that especially in times where we have moments of weakness, or times where we feel that we get down on ourselves and we have our off days, I think it's important to realize that we tend to romanticize or fantasize about something that could be, and we put it on a pedestal, but we don't realize it's fantasy. It's not like that. Everybody's got their own weaknesses and fallacies, and our brothers and sisters are like that too. And it's important that we recognize the situation for really what it is. And this is something that I mentioned in one of my previous videos also, was the notion of connecting to your emotional memory of all some of the past memories you may have had that contributed to your decision to back away or whatnot. So in some cases, for the people that are doing the shunning, I think that it's important to reconnect to that real vision and to reconnect to those memories, to kind of have an even keel to be able to see it for what it is.
I think too that this particular time in our lives during coronavirus, there is a tendency to fantasize even more. And I believe that coronavirus has underscored the pain of estrangement.
Yeah.
I think it's true in general that anytime there's a birthday or National Siblings Day or some event that is a reminder of what's missing in life, that brings out that pain once again. But with coronavirus, there are a couple of things at play. And one is, what if something happens to my only sibling or my estranged sibling? How am I going to feel if I never have the chance to actually have that conversation with them?
That's a good point you're bringing up in that way, and I think that that's something that we're all going to have to deal with everything that's going on. And maybe it's already happened for some people, that you start to worry or have fears that this might be it, and that at the same time, it's important to realize that, again, those are fears. And I love the acronym that comes with fear, which is false evidence appearing real. I love that. Because it is, because I think that oftentimes what we fear doesn't end up happening. And it's important not to make decisions based on that, because if you start to negate some of the values or some of the intentions that you built yourself up on to say, well, I'm going to maintain that space, and all of a sudden you start to second guess yourself, or you start to go into wanting to somehow cave in and say, okay, well, I'm gonna go and see. Well, you're taking a risk by doing that, that's for sure. But at the same time, to reestablish connection simply because there's an external event going on, by negating your own personal history with your sibling, I think people have to be careful about that. Yeah.
I think there's a tendency in sibling estrangement to say, if only, especially if you were the one who was shunned. If only I could make this work. And during coronavirus, that experience is even louder in your head. And the reason is that there's a terrible sense of alienation right now. And so coronavirus and these shelter-in-place restrictions underscore those feelings. And that's another piece of why I think sibling estrangement has intensified during this time.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that the notion of isolation has been a big one that plays on people's minds. And this is when we're especially alone, and we tend to ruminate. This is what we all do, is whenever we're alone, we have our heads start to spin, and that's the thing. And this is something that I often recommend to people, is to keep busy and to focus on what you control as opposed to what you don't control. And you control what you say, you control what you do, you control your time spent with people in your family, at home. You control your comings and goings and your voice tone, but you don't control other people's reactions. You don't control what people think of you. You don't control their interpretation of events. So again, if people second guess themselves and they start to reestablish contact, well, you have to ask yourself, are those issues already resolved, or are you going to be put back into the spotlight and finger pointed and essentially demonized for being who you are, or criticized continuously. I think that you have to put it in perspective, and this is what you were saying earlier, is that fantasy versus the real vision of what the relationship is.
It's like a second wave of sibling estrangement might come, just like the coronavirus.
Yeah, that's the thing. So I think it's important to consider that.
You delude yourself. You know, if you're deluding yourself, you could have that second wave.
Well, that's the thing. Exactly. You could have that second wave. And that's a great way of putting it, because we forget, and the mind idealizes. It likes fantasies. It likes to have hope, and those are all good things. Not a bad thing, but there's always a shadow element to some of the good things that we have, and that's where that shadow element can come in. Is that basically it can turn against you. You may think it's going to go in a direction, but it can turn against you fairly quickly, and then you're going to be reconfirmed once more the reality of what the relationship is. And all we have to do is look at some of the forums we've seen online, both you and I, where people have tried, and they said that this would be their last time because they basically got that slap in the face of reality that hit them hard.
Happily, in my case, I have sustained my reconciled relationship with my brother for the last 6 years. Now, what did that take? Oh my goodness. It took a lot of overlooking and setting anger down at the side of the road. So not becoming enraged once again when I saw the same repeated behaviors.
Yeah. And perhaps what helps you with that is that you keep it on a surface level in that way. It's possible you may have a limited conversation, or a superficial conversation, I like to call it. And I kind of want to expand a little bit more on that, because I think that's important that we kind of touch on how people can maintain that sense of having that surface on the funnel. In one of my videos, we talked about that with the funnel. And I think that it's important that people realize, yes, you can keep it in general topics, but there's different topics also that can help to be non-contentious in some ways. Non-contentious memories with, say, mom or dad's birthdays, what did they have and where, really focusing on the facts as opposed to the interpretation. Talking about TV shows or movies, upcoming events, concerts or whatnot, they work because they're not directly related to you as an individual. And that's why those are safer topics to have if ever there comes a time where there are some interactions that happen and that you need to feel that sense of safety and surface level.
I think it's important to just basically accept who they are and where they are in their lives. And again, this plays back into that issue of fantasy. In terms of my relationship with my brother, I had to accept him exactly as he is at this moment in time. And I think there's a tendency, particularly in my case, if there's an older brother, to see him in a certain way that you might have seen him when you were a child. And it's once you let go of a lot of the expectation and the hope and simply accept them for who they are, it's a lot easier to reconcile.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think that helps to see the person according to who they are, and again, you're having more of a neutral vision on them. You're not having a type of vision that is based on necessarily the pain that they've caused you, though it's important to remember to protect yourself from that. And remember what it is that where the relationship can become explosive. It's important to keep that in the back of your mind. You know?
Right. I think what you're saying is that you have to keep in mind what you can actually expect of them too.
Yeah, in that way, and I think that's something to protect yourself with, because again, if those buttons are pushed, then this is where the exit strategy becomes important, where you can know that, okay, well, if this happens, here's what I can do. So even giving yourself small goals like that to say, okay, well, if you're choosing to talk with somebody, that you do it for a fixed amount of time. If certain topics come up, you know that you can back away instead of getting into the tug of war or kind of chewing the rag, because if you start to do that, then invariably nothing good is going to come out of it, because the other person won't be able to acknowledge your needs within that context.
Siblings really hold a unique place in your life. They are anchors. And I think when you don't have that relationship, you lose a sense of balance. And so unless the relationship is extraordinarily abusive or toxic, I think it's probably best to have some relationship rather than none at all. And it makes those family gatherings a whole lot easier if you can actually go over and say, hello, how are you, rather than staying in other rooms and avoiding one another.
Yeah, and there's degrees to that. I would agree with you. It depends, I think, on the volatility. And again, there's some people that have more extreme volatile relationships that I think that no contact is perfectly fine. But it depends also the type of volatility or the type of irritations that come up within that relationship. And it's good to check what those are. And if you feel that you get stronger over time and you start to trust in your ability to do that and to be within certain family contexts, then yeah, I think that a limited contact like that can be doable, provided you recognize your boundaries, you recognize the tools that you have, that what's within your power, be able to work with that or exit when the time is right or when things start to go sour.
So let me ask you this then. What do you tell the client who says, I absolutely cannot have a relationship? How do I accept that I can't have a relationship with my sibling?
Well, that's certainly a big topic because we're going against something that is very counterintuitive with society. So there's so many different factors involved in that. But one of the first things I would do, of course, is acknowledge the pain. Acknowledge your feelings, that you're not crazy. You have experienced something that's been happening for a while for you to make this decision. And I would say that it's a step towards empowerment. You're not abandoning yourself. You're not compromising yourself or diluting yourself. Quite the contrary, you're acknowledging you as an individual, and you to make that decision is you to step towards empowerment. So I think that that's really, really important for people to see it as such. And we recognize in some ways how people can get their power back when they do that. So there's really something that's important to be able to that's something that's important to look at, because when you do that, you're going to feel less depleted. You're going to feel more energy over time. You're going to feel more like yourself. You're going to feel more that your qualities are coming out. You're going to love yourself more in terms of who you are. So your whole self-image transforms itself by you not being in contact with somebody that's going to bring you down or deplete you or just experience a sense of toxicity on a regular basis.
One of the people I interviewed for the book was a twin, and she and her brother did not talk to each other at all. And she finally performed a ceremony where she stopped. She made herself twinless. It was a way of mourning and having some closure. And actually, some of the other therapists I interviewed for the book talked about the need for some finality and some way to recognize the grief, whether in a ceremony or in your thinking, so that you can move forward.
You know, when I used to host my bereavement counseling groups, we would have such a ceremony, as a matter of fact, and it was for their dead loved ones, and sometimes we have conflicting feelings, and it's okay. It's okay to have different feelings that happen and that occur, but I would definitely recommend it, yes, that if there's a ritual of some sort that helps to acknowledge, yes, rituals are very important for us. And we've lost that in modern society in general. We don't have that many rituals anymore. There's certain religions that still uphold those rituals in certain key moments. In that way, when people become of age, there's certain acknowledgments that come up. But we don't have that in mainstream society as much. So all the more importance in creating those rituals, as you say, and whatever ritual that is, that can be discussed with a therapist, or it can be researched and seen how that can be done in a way to acknowledge how the person feels. Definitely.
Well, I think this has been a wonderful exchange, and I'm really glad to hear your suggestions. I think you offer very concrete practices which can help the estranged. And I wish I had talked to you about 20 years ago. I could have used the help.
Well,
anyway, I hope that our viewers will join us at another time for Brothers, Sisters, Strangers. I'm Fern Chapman.
and I'm Ali John Chaudhary, psychotherapist. This has been a pleasure to be able to do this again with you, Fern. I think that we're bringing a voice to these important undiscussed issues that need to be highlighted more so. And definitely we'll get more into some of these topics and subjects that need talking about. So it's been a pleasure again to have you at Brothers, Sisters, Strangers podcast. And hopefully we'll continue again, and we'll see each other soon.
Thank you. It'll be great.
All right. Talk soon. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.